wonder why this happens.
Well, I know one of them you've mentioned to me a number of times.
That's why there's specific laws and documentation for perpetual intermittent rights.
Tell me about straight hair.
I did note that the maximum in a lot of European countries tends to be a lot higher than in Australian countries.
I don't know if you looked this up, but for me, the most confusing thing about stairs is not how high or low or deep they are. Tech, when you know it as an industry, is terrible behind the scenes. It's a fucking amazing that anything works.
I think that about like basically every mechanical system or civil system that's come out there, just because I studied alongside mechanical engineers and civil engineers, and they're all fucking idiots. And I'm like, how are you guys building stuff?
And being too easy to use. And so people could make tons of progress with very little knowledge. Were so smart that they built tools that enabled people around them to not need to know what they know. But now they're all dead.
Dive into the intriguing world of deep technology and its intersection with business on Technocracy. We're your hosts, Ajay and Loon. Let's explore the breakthroughs and people shaping the future of technology. Technocracy Podcast.
Dude, actually, I have a stat for you on Pokemon cards. Like, I was going to include it, but it's such a small thing. Okay, so... Okay, so Pokemon used to print 1 billion cards per year before the year 2020. And then in 2024, they printed 12 billion cards. So they've increased by 12x in like 4 years, essentially. And it's something like... Only 65 billion cards were produced in the lifetime of the game. So in 2024 alone, like 20% of the entire printing was occurred for Pokemon cards.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's some Pokemon inflation then.
And I thought the hype was over, but then the latest set, like Prismatic Evolutions, is now in shortage again. So people are scalping it. So something's happening now. I thought Pokemon cards was dead, but there's a big spike this year apparently, and I'm not capitalizing on it, so I'm thinking about selling some shit now, because now's the time to sell if everyone's like...
Do you have any understanding of why that spike is happening?
I think it's highly correlated to like the markets. When the markets do well and people have money and they feel rich, they start dumping in random shit, just like crypto. And I think when crypto does well, Pokemon cards also do well. Just another speculative.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
People end up with a lot of weird spare change from crypto.
That's my thinking. And so now people are like, it's starting to flood into the Pokemon space. And so we'll see how it pans out.
So what do you have for me today? I've got one thing for you, and it's not super deep, and it's I picked it because it's anti-AI.
Okay. Mine's also not super deep. Like, the category was things I think about on a drive, which is true. Like, all three of these things are just like, I wonder why this happens.
Well, I know one of them you've mentioned to me a number of times, so I'm actually pretty interested to hear about how it works. So shall we kick off with that?
The graveyard one?
Yeah.
So I wasted so much time researching this thing because I couldn't find an answer. ChatGPT wouldn't give me an answer, and then everything I Googled wouldn't give me an answer. I then went to all the companies. So there's big companies here like White Lady Funerals and things like that that operate as funeral companies that are for profit. Looked into their websites, downloaded their pricing sheets for different things and like how to look at it. And there's burial fees, but there's no like explicit like, okay, what happens? You pay this burial fee to like take the plot. Then after that, do you keep paying rent or do you just own it? Like, how does it work exactly? And I finally found it on the New South Wales government website, right? And so there's like some legal stuff around it. So before 2018, there was something called perpetual intermittent rights, which basically meant that you own the plot forever. If you pay for the plot, you just own it forever. That's just how it works. It's basically like buying a house. Like, you own that land.
Can I do anything I want with it? Or can I dig up the person that I put there and then do something else with it?
No. So it is a plot. It's used for burial, and that's it. Like, you can't do anything else with it. And that's why there's specific laws and documentation for perpetual intermittent rights, like specifically that. Okay. You can't transfer the rights to other people, and if you die without bequeathing it, then it becomes part of your personal estate that isn't passed on by your will.
Can I change what's buried there, or does it have to be remains of dead people?
It's a good question. I didn't read that deeply into like what are the edge cases of your plot, like. But interestingly, after 2018, the government basically said, okay, we have a lot of prime real estate that's just like sat up by graveyards. And apologies if anyone listening has a loved one in a graveyard in a high traffic area. But, realistically, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, that land may want to be used for something else. And so they invented this thing called the renewable intermittent right. And so that is for a limited period. So minimum of 25 years, maximum of 99 years. You're allowed to renew it. The person who owns the cemetery basically has to call you and tell you, I think 6 months after the expiry date. Sorry, 12 months before the expiry date, they will call you, and you have 18 months from that period to renew it if you want to, for like another couple of years or so.
Is that now the new default? Like, does everything have to be under this renewable structure now, or can places still sell plots that are permanent?
You can do both now. So there is now the option for renewable, but it seems that the more intensely populated areas.
So if it was like a privately owned for-profit graveyard, why did the government need to step in and create this option? And why was it not just something that like I could offer as a private owner of that land? Say, this is my land. Come bury your people here. I'll give it to you for 25 years.
So I believe it's the commercial arrangement. Like as soon as you start selling plots for burials, then you are now under these like regulations. But if you decide to bury a family member on your own land, then that's like, you do whatever you want.
You get tax write-offs for that in the US, right?
For burials.
Isn't that like famously one of the things that I'm absolutely going to have to fact check myself on this. But if I recall correctly, it's like Mar-a-Lago or some like insanely like covert plot of land has like one Trump person buried on it so that the Trump family can claim it's a graveyard, and then like there's a different tax structure that they can tap into.
That's wild. I want to dig into that now. That's crazy. I didn't know that. The thing is, I did so much research on this, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready for the questions. And then like none of the questions you asked I was ready for.
Tax loophole.
This is specific to New South Wales, by the way. So Western Australia only has renewable rights?
Yeah, there you go. So Ivana Trump's was buried near the first hole of the Trump National Golf Club to offer their business tax breaks.
Do you know what the tax break is?
The tax code in New Jersey exempts cemetery land from all taxes, rates, and assessments.
That's so... What? Why wouldn't everyone do that then?
Amazing. Because it's kind of weird. Like...
Yeah, but... Jeez. Wait, you're saying the business itself doesn't so if it's a golfing business, their golfing revenue is no longer taxed?
I don't know, man.
Okay.
I just Googled it to make sure I got my base facts right. So it was the Trump family. It wasn't Mar-a-Lago. It was the Trump National Golf Club. And it was Ivana Trump is apparently buried near the first hole. And New Jersey does have a law that exempts cemeteries from rates and assessments on the land. Don't know how successful that attempt was at actually getting away from having to pay those taxes and like what the extent of those taxes are, right? It's obviously not the tax. I would be surprised if it was the tax of the business, but there's like land rates and things like that you pay, which are separate, right? So
interesting. So, by the way, in Canberra, they don't have renewable intermittent rights. Intimate? I just realized it doesn't say intermittent. It says.
And for our listeners, Canberra is a city in Australia that happens to be the capital.
Yeah. So New South Wales has this as an optional thing. Western Australia only has renewable rights, which is interesting because I figured they had way more land to just bury people in, but I guess not. And then South Australia also has optional renewable rights, and then they're also common in various European countries, but that's...
So this doesn't really answer the base question, though, which is like, what is the economics of graveyards? So like as a graveyard owner, how could I possibly ever have made money selling permanent plots of land for a fixed price?
So the way they're making money, this to me was the critical issue. Like, are you paying an ongoing fee, or like are you getting paid ongoing to do these things? I think once the cemetery is full, they just sort of stop action, and then you pay for maintenance fees. So if you, it's kind of like a strata. So if you want someone to come in and clean it and like, make sure everything is kept, then you pay the maintenance fees.
But surely long term that doesn't work out because eventually everyone dies.
Yeah, you just run out of
anyone
people
cares
to
about
do
that
it.
great dies.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. But essentially you're selling plots of land, right? So you're buying the big piece of land, you're selling it for a slightly higher premium, but very small plots, and then you make your money there. You sell ceremonies, and you have funeral directors and all those kinds of things, all these add-on services that typically the margins are pretty good on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you own the land, and if there are similar laws in Australia that exempt you from like rates and things like that, then it's basically like a once-off thing, right? It's like you buy the land for $1 million, you sell it in total for 10, you take your $9 million profit, and you're like, all right, that's me. You move on.
Yeah, I also think the maintenance is pretty minimal at some point. Like once it's full,
I've never understood people who care about graveyards, to be honest.
Yeah, once it's full, you don't do anything. You just sort of let it do its thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are
Do the
religious-owned
minimum
graveyards. I
legal
think you
thing
mentioned
that
that before as well, right?
What was that?
There are religious-owned graveyards as well and non-profit-owned graveyards. So I'm specifically talking about the for-profit graveyards. So I was curious about that model because the rest, like, obviously they have different
Yeah.
models.
Do the minimum legal thing to get rid of my body.
Yeah? Do you want to do something cool with it?
Nah. Let my legacy be like the AI clone version of myself that runs autonomously on the blockchain.
Actually, is that what you want?
I don't know, that'd be pretty sick.
Okay. Interesting. I think I want to be turned into like an heirloom, like a diamond or something.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sick. Yeah, there's services that will do that, right? You cremate your ashes, they filter out the carbon, they compress it into diamonds.
Yeah, and then hopefully like possess it and like just stick around a little bit longer. Just the hope.
Okay, tell me about straight hair. As someone who doesn't have straight hair, tell me about optimal. Holy shit! I completely misread your notes and I've just stared at it again. It's not straight hair at all.
I was just like,
Stair.
I was like, that's
Optimal stair. I was so confused by it. You sent me your notes. You're like optimal straight hair, and I read that. And I was like, okay, fine.
No, optimal stair height.
Shit, I'm less interested in this actually. I wanted to know how on earth there was an optimal type of straightness for hair.
You know what? I'm going to do that next time. But yeah, this one is less interesting, but still somewhat interesting. I was just curious because every time I walk upstairs, I'm like, okay, this is a different height. Why is this like designed this way? Is there like regulations around this thing? I think the cool takeaway here is that there's like a magic formula for stairs. And the more I Google it, the more I see this formula everywhere. And the formula is 2R plus G, right? And it is the slope relationship for stairs. And so 2R plus G basically means 2 times the riser height, i.e. like how high do you have to lift your knee to like step on the step? And then the tread depth, or also known as the going, which I don't know why it's called the going, but that's what it's called, which is the length of the step that you can sort of put your foot on. And that ratio, 2 times riser height plus tread depth, should be between about 54 centimeters and 70 centimeters. So that was interesting.
So the riser height is the actual height of the stair, and then the going is the depth.
Yeah. So 2 times the height plus the going is sort of how you get this like optimal ratio for your step based on the gait of like how
Surely
you're
that's nuts though, because if your going was like 1 centimeter, having a super high rise would be an awful thing.
Yeah, so what they do is they say there's a min-max for the riser, there's a min-max for the going, and then there's a min-max for the slope relationship.
1 meter rise.
Yeah, so yeah, obviously you could like, if you min-max that entire equation, then you get like 1.
That's what I want to see, the most ridiculous optimal stair.
I did actually think about that too. Like, what is the worst type of stair? And it would be something with a very high riser and a very low depth, because then you like very likely to miss the step.
It's called a rock climbing wall.
Yeah, pretty much.
And is there regulation around this?
Yeah, so Australia has 2. So there's the AS 1657 and the BCA, slightly different sort of recommendations, but typically the riser is between, and this is a pretty big range, but goes from anywhere from 11.5 centimeters to 22.5 centimeters for the rise.
That is a big deal.
Yeah. Depends on which regulation you use. AES uses 1300 as 13 centimeters as the minimum, and then BCA uses 11.5. So it depends.
Who's that guy that goes around measuring stairs?
I think there's been some engineering work.
This is the kind of thing that I think you should just leave to like lawsuits to sort out.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm sure that there's like a...
Fuck my taxes going to paying some guy going around and measuring staircases. Just let me sue people if I trip on their ridiculous 1 meter rise, 5 centimeter going step, right? And then people will naturally converge on like the safest possible staircase.
Yeah, exactly. They probably just plot accidents against like riser height and like tread depth and like figure it out from there.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question, right? Is like, how did how did stair designers converge on this?
So one thing was looking at like the human gait. So typically how you would move your foot up and down. So how you would rise your foot. And the idea is to sort of catch your foot at the like top of your movement essentially, right? So as you're sort of stepping forward, like what is the top? Typically that's around 15 to 20 centimeters, depending on like how big you step. And yes, there has to be some exaggerated movement here. Otherwise, like if you're just like sliding along, then you're not going to be able to step.
I was going to say, because like the other caveat here is that like the hardest part of any muscle contraction is the maximum stretch, like where the muscle is at its maximum stretch, right? Which means you wouldn't actually want to be right at the peak of the foot movement, because that's where you're at your maximum contraction. So you'd want a little bit of.
So it's more like the maximum at a reasonable sort of stepping gait, as opposed to like, because obviously you can like bring your knee all the way up and you can step like 40, 50 centimeters, but that's the idea. You want to minimize the amount of pressure on your knees, but also move at a rate that's quite good, because obviously you could reduce the riser to like 2 centimeters and it'll just take you forever to get up there, but it'd be way easier. So there's like a...
But I think everyone's experienced that, right? Where you have like this I mean, even to call it a step is kind of, they've got like these tiny little rises and these big goings. Usually it's kind of in big buildings, like in the sort of like entryway, like it's almost like ceremonial.
Yeah, I mean, situationally it's a bit different too. So usually residential staircases have a higher rising, because the assumption there is that people are more familiar with it and they're used to it. Whereas with commercial...
You probably want to be a more optimal use of space as well.
That as well. And then I think commercial, like they have to accommodate for a much wider range of users. So they typically have a much smaller rising. So there's a few caveats and a few different things. I did note that the maximum in a lot of European countries tends to be a lot higher than in Australian countries. Does that mean that Europeans have better knees and can lift their knees up better?
My best guess on that is like, for anyone who's been to a European city, there are so many buildings that are really old that you're just kind of dealing with what you've got. And if you were to put that, you couldn't put a low rise staircase into many of those buildings. It just would not, like, you don't have the horizontal space to get up to the vertical height that you need, right? You're talking about really old buildings, very narrow. So maybe it's just, again, it's just a cultural thing, like how used to that stair height are you? Because like for me, and actually, I don't know if you looked this up, but for me, the most confusing thing about stairs is not how high or low or deep they are. It's the consistency. Do they stay the same rise at every step? Obviously, the most ridiculous staircase that you could build would be one where the rise is constantly changing. And I literally had this experience yesterday when I was walking down a staircase from a cafe, and the very first step was like twice the rise of all the others. And so you're going down, and visually you just kind of see a bunch of steps, and you kind of just space that the first one is this extra drop, and you just almost fucking fall all the way down the staircase. Like,
yeah, that's stupid.
Do you have any notion of like, what's the variance that you can, like, that humans are sensitive to?
Like literally 1 centimeter. Like it's like a very low variance that we can detect. Like maybe you don't trip over, but your actual ability to perceive that like slight change in variance is quite high. And so, yeah, I think it was like around 1 centimeter, or even like maybe a little bit higher.
So stair building must actually be pretty tough then, because you've got to nail that height. And you kind of also have to think about the vertical height that you're trying to achieve. So it's like if I've got some vertical height y that I need to get to, I need to divide that perfectly evenly amongst the number of stairs, make sure that the result of that division falls within the right range. And then I have to build it to within less than half a centimeter of like error. And surely those errors compound, right? Like if you build a staircase to like, you got 10 stairs and you got a like 10 millimeter error, which is not that big. By the time you reach the top of the staircase, you've got a 1 centimeter error, and you've got to correct for that because you've got a floor that you need to reach.
So in Australia, the tolerance is plus or minus 5 millimeters. So half a centimeter.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, I remember reading somewhere, and I can't find it now, but we can detect quite small tolerances or like small differences within the stairs, and throws us off. But I think it's more to do with what you said, which is like, it adds up over like 20 stairs, right?
I think I'm going to have a deeper appreciation for bad staircases now.
Yeah.
Like, I'll walk up a shit staircase and I'm like, yeah, fair enough, this is pretty hard.
But even those like natural sort of staircases you get when you go hiking, right, where it's very uneven, like it makes you a lot more tired than you would typically if it's just like a constant, predictable.
But you're prepped for it. You're prepped for it, right? Like visually, I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, you can't visually detect a less than 1 cent, surely. Like a visual detection of a 1 centimeter difference between your staircase is going to be very hard to detect, even if you can feel it as you're walking up the stairs. And I think that's the trick, is like when you're not prepared for something, that's when it fucks you up.
I remember once.
I want technology for...
I remember once when I was working as like an intern. This is like years ago. Like I was running up these stairs and I tripped over one stair and I was like, that fucking stair is like off. And my friend was like, what are you talking about? You just like tripped over a stair. I'm like, no, I'm telling you that stair is off. So we went and got a ruler, like put it against each of the stairs. And that stair was off by like a centimeter. And I was like, I told you.
I'm going to have a lot more trust in my sense of whether it's like, is it me or is it the staircase?
The thing is, I wasn't sure. I was just like, I just doubled down on this thing and I was like, fuck, I hope I'm right.
I wonder if clubs have to have even higher levels of precision, given that they deal with drunk clientele.
Wait, what needs a high level of precision?
Clubs and bars and stuff need like an even higher level of precision for drunk.
Yeah, 100%. There's this bar in Sydney that has this like winding staircase that you have to go up and down when drinking. And I remember like after you get drunk, walking down those stairs is incredibly difficult. And that's like my sober test. And that staircase or that club has had like several ambulances called to it per week because it always happens. Someone always falls down the stairs.
Let the free market of lawsuits figure this out. Why don't regulate?
No, I think it's an evolutionary mechanism for filtering out the wrong people. So it's okay.
Has our technology changed for building stairs?
That I don't know. I did want to do a thing on elevators, and my good friend Albert is an elevator engineer, or used to be an elevator engineer. So I was like, maybe I should bring him on board and get a history lesson on elevators. But I don't know.
I heard the most terrifying thing, and I'm not sure I want to look into it. And you may know this from just your own experience as like a product manager in tech, but like tech, when you know it as an industry, is terrible behind the scenes. It's a fucking amazing that anything works, that Wi-Fi works, that satellites aren't crashing out from the sky, that we're able to communicate over. Like, it's just a mess behind the scenes. And I saw a meme once that made that, it was like a meme specifically aimed at elevator engineers that essentially expressed that same sentiment. And I was like, I do not want to look into this. I do not want to know that the elevator industry is surprised that elevators aren't crashing out of the sky.
I think that about like basically every mechanical system or civil system that's come out there, just because I studied alongside mechanical engineers and civil engineers, and they're all fucking idiots. And I'm like, how are you guys building stuff? I don't understand. You guys literally used to like pour beer on your head and like fail your math tests and get like 51s and sort of barely scrape by. And now you're in charge of Boeing. Like, I'm terrified.
Instead of Boeing ain't doing much good engineering.
Oh man, I don't know if that's like a testament to the fault tolerance systems we have as a society with engineering, that we've just like figured out ways to make sure that the factor of safety is good enough, or I don't know.
There's this really great talk, and I cannot remember what it's called, but I will find it and I'll send it to you, and we can discuss it in one of our future episodes, which is basically like breaks down the de-evolution of human technology. And what I mean by that is that one of the first things that you do, and again, anyone in the tech industry will know this to be true, is that you build tools to make your life easier. It's a very natural thing to do. You know, it's like, instead of having to build this piece of technology from scratch every single time, I'm going to build tools to make building future versions of this technology easier, right? We don't code in ones and zeros anymore. We have programming languages. And our programming languages got more and more sophisticated, and they eventually passed a threshold of being sophisticated and started going into a threshold of being dumb, right? And being too easy to use. And so people could make tons of progress with very little knowledge. And as a result, your society ends up de-evolving. And there are just far fewer good programmers today than there were 10 years ago, because the tools are so much easier to use that you actually don't have to be a good programmer. And the challenge is that like it's this really insidious problem, because like for the most part, everything's fine. But like when you actually need like really hardcore people, you can't find them anywhere. Like the graybeards that know how like chips are manufactured, there's very few of these people left, because you just don't need them anymore, because they were so smart that they built tools that enabled people around them to not need to know what they know. But now that they're all dead, people look at those tools and they're like, what the fuck is this witchcraft, right? And AI is either going to make that problem better, or it's going to make it worse, right? It's either going to make it better because the AI can come in and explain stuff and teach it back to us, or it's going to make it worse because there's going to be this huge gap between the juniors and the seniors, because all of those people are just going to get replaced by AI, right? And the seniors are going to know what they're doing, and they're not going to be replaceable because maybe AI hits a wall and whatever, right? But then there's going to, like, you're not going to be able to train juniors into mids into seniors, because no industrial group is going to bother spending that money unless they're really, really forward looking, and most of them aren't. And this is kind of the problem with Boeing, is they had a bunch of amazing airplane engineers. They built all these really sophisticated tools to make building airplanes better. And then they essentially accidentally phased out all the experts. And then when it got time to building new planes, you just had a bunch of idiots running the show who didn't actually know what they were doing.
That's a really good point. I do think about this. I think I have a slightly more pessimistic outlook. I think that the latter is probably more true, where I don't think there's ROI to actually learn the in-depth stuff, right? Like you said, you wanted to learn molecular biology, or is that what you wanted to learn this year, or like spend more time on it? Like most people won't do that because there's no payoff to that. Like there's no need to go that deep into it. Even with me learning to code, like I don't really care how it works, nor is there any payoff for me to learn that stuff. And you know, I guess I'm not a developer, so it doesn't really matter. But there's a lot of developers thinking like there's no point in me learning the underlying stuff.
But I think the other deeper issue is that even if you did care to code, how good do you want to get? You will get good enough to do a bunch of damage and not get good enough to know how to solve that damage, right? Like, and you've probably seen it in companies before, right? Where your first round of engineers are usually very junior because they're not getting paid much, whatever, or because you've got a founder who's not super technical, so they don't know how to assess, and the person can make progress really quickly on the basics, and then the moment shit gets hard, that person falls apart. And like trying to find people who can come in and they look at what was built and they're like, this is not even fit for purpose. Like we have to start again. And so it was interesting because this speech was done by essentially someone who's a programming languages guy. But he went back through and like analyzed the same pattern that happens across many industries, both in the modern human society, but also in like Roman society, where there were like forms of art, forms of manufacturing, forms of material science that people just forgot how to do. Because they had kind of industrialized it.
Is this on YouTube?
Yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah, I really want to listen to this. It's interesting. I like it when people draw parallels to like, you know, old stuff.
Everyone loves a good Roman analogy.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say, I think like just to bring it back to like a more tangible example to today, I do find a lot of high functioning people in companies that just lack basic numeracy skills or math skills, right? So, you know, I'd say something as simple, to me, I think it's simple, you know, calculate the conversion rate And I think intuitively one would think, cool, you get like, you get the output number and you put it on top of the input number and then you like turn it into a percentage, right? Whatever funnel you're doing, like whatever's coming in and whatever's coming out, you get the thing coming out, put it on top, and like logically you can come up with that math. But I had to be very explicit. And I think a lot of people got used to just knowing conversion rate for specific things. So they're like, oh, cool. Like I just get the number of signups and put over traffic. But then when they get a problem that doesn't fall cleanly into that. So if I want the conversion rate of this email, they're like, oh, cool. Like, do I get the clicks and put over the opens? Or like which stat do I put on the other one? And they didn't understand that one level deeper of like, cool, you get the input and put over the output, right? And I had to explain that a few times.
There's a really famous version of this problem, which is a little bit more sophisticated than conversion rates, but it's fucked up by people who are more sophisticated than people handling conversion rates. It's called the medical test paradox. Have you heard it? Okay, so suppose that you have 1 in 10,000 people have a particular disease, right? And you have a test for that disease that is 99% accurate, which means that if you do have the disease and the test comes back positive with a 99% probability, right? So if you have it 99% of the time, the test will say positive. And if you don't have the disease, the test comes back negative 99% of the time, right? So it's wrong 1% of the time for true, for false negatives and false positives, right? Now, let's say you go to the doctor and you get a test and it comes back positive. What's the probability that you have the disease? Just off the top of your head, like what's your intuition? You've got a test that's 99% accurate. If you have a disease, 99% of the time, it'll tell you do. If you don't have it, 99% of the time, it'll tell you don't. You go to the doctor, you get the test, it tells you have the disease. What's the actual chance you have that disease?
It tells you have the disease, then you have a 99% chance you have the disease.
No, you have a 1% chance of having the disease. Because what people mess up in their intuition is the prior, which is that only 1 in 10,000 people have the disease to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And once you include that prior in your breakdown, the numbers come out way better. And the reason why this is such a problem is because it's a very real world problem. Like that construction is very, very real. And I think it was like every doctor, like there's quite a famous like presentation where, this guy poses this to a symposium of doctors or whatever. And like literally everyone in the audience gets it wrong. And you're like, that's actually a problem. You're getting a test for a disease and you go to the doctor's like, yeah, you've got this disease. And the doctor's like, yeah, you've got a 99% chance of having it. And the reality is the exact opposite.
So it's even worse that I studied theoretical physics and I still couldn't get that right. The thing is, when you started talking, I was like, oh, this is a Bayesian probability thing. And I just immediately was like trying to figure out which numbers were which. And I just ignored the first part of what you said. And I was like, wait, but this is not Bayesian. I don't know how to do this. Anyway. You got me.
I mean, the reality is it's just hard to do those numbers in your head, right?
Yeah.
But the correct answer is like, I don't know. I need to plug those things into a Bayesian like predictor and get a more sophisticated answer because I know that my your intuition should be that it's a Bayesian problem, and therefore your answer should be that this calculation is actually not something I can do in my head. Yeah. There are techniques for estimating it in your head very, very accurately, and there's a really great YouTube video breakdown on one of my favorite maths videos called 3 Blue 1 Brown that does exactly that. Highly recommend. He did a breakdown of this during the pandemic, I think, because it was highly relevant. But yeah, that's a classic example of like very sophisticated, very highly educated, very well trained experts fucking up what is essentially basic statistics.
I think the point I was more making, and that's a good point that you made. I think the point I was making more was that a lot of people aren't learning how to deal with variability in their problems, right? So if they do a course on a web development thing, they learn how to build that exact website. But as soon as you tell them to go like build it slightly different or deal with these like complications or differences, they can't do that. And I think that's where the issue of like not understanding actually what you're doing becomes an issue, right? Like you can do exactly what you need to do if you're following the exact same variables and like nothing's changed, but as soon as things are changing, you don't know how to deal with that change. And I think that's what I was like, worried about for the future, essentially.
And I think this sort of, I don't want to call it a paradox, but maybe like this dilemma where either you believe that AI is as good as it's going to get, or you believe it's going to get significantly better. Those are kind of your two baskets that people are falling into right now, right? That there's obviously still improvements to make, but is it getting like fundamentally better than it already is, or not? And
do you have any thoughts?
If you believe that it's not getting fundamentally better, then we kind of have this problem that you've just described, where these AIs will like do the basics and they will struggle to like do variations of it, but people will kind of get away with that because they have these tools that they can use, and it will just make this problem worse, where people will be able to do the basics and not be able to handle variations at all. Because it's like working with an AI is like the worst type of programming language, because you just describe it. And I've seen these really funny memes, or not even memes, but like these like conversations of people working with AI who are trying to build programs that haven't been able to, they're not coders. And so they're encountering these issues where they tell that they ask the program for something and it's not quite what they want, and they realize that what they asked was slightly ambiguous, and so they ask it more specifically. And then you see these people who aren't programmers essentially inventing programming languages, like at least at the conceptual level. And you see these conversations like, oh, we need like a way to like really unambiguously tell the AI what it is that we want from it, the exact conditions, blah, blah. And you're like, at that point, it's called a fucking programming language. We have these already. You need to go and learn how they work. If you fall into the camp where you think the AI is going to get significantly better, then you could argue that the AI is going to be able to do this thing, handle the variations, and be able to teach it back to you so that you understand what's going on. But the question is, like, why would you bother teaching a human how to do the thing if you can do the thing?
Yeah.
And it's almost like, in principle, if the AI can teach you the thing, then it can do the thing. And so just get it to do it. And the human just gets completely removed from the loop. So anything the AI can teach you, it's no longer worth teaching you, because it'll just do it itself. At least that's what probably the free market will converge on. And so no matter what you believe, the problem is just going to get worse. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit of AI doomerism.
Yeah, I don't know where we land. I have started to think more and more that we maybe started to hit a limit with what we can do with AI, but it's really hard to tell. Like, I think at least from a text generation perspective, I haven't seen that many big improvements. The reasoning's really interesting, and I've like used it for certain things, but I don't know. Have we hit like a wall? Like, I think starting to slow down a bit.
I don't think we've hit a wall in the sense that like, have you been following the ARC benchmarks? I think we discussed it
like from whatever we discussed. Yeah.
Yeah. So 03 was the most recent model tested against that, and it did significantly better than anything else. It still messes up very basic things, and like it's like $1,000 or $10,000 worth of compute to just like solve a task that a human can look at just like boop, 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 in 2 seconds. But again, like, you just have to look at the rate of improvement, and I don't think that's been slowing down too much. It's getting more expensive to do, surely.
But I'm like curious, like, if that rate of improvement's very fast in a very like siloed set of like, like math, STEM, reasonings type things, and like, yeah. I
mean, the argument is that they're trying to construct these benchmarks to be general enough that if you're good at them, you're probably good at other things, right? That's why they've specifically designed these benchmarks to try and be general reasoning, kind of critical thinking problems. Now, how much you believe that a benchmark can capture that, I don't know. There probably is some kind of benchmark that can capture it. Whether our benchmarks are the ones is an outstanding question. But the progress is definitely getting better, right? Like 6 months ago, I think the best AI was scoring like 20%, right? And now it scores 80%. So there's definitely progress, and it's definitely not language reasoning. It's like spatial reasoning and like pattern recognition in sort of more like a complex way.
Is this what you wanted to talk about, or is there something else anti-AI?
No, but it's a good segue actually into what I was going to talk about.
Are you going to make us feel better about AI and why it's not going to take over the world?
This is why current AI is not going to take over the world. So I came across this article on Hacker News, which was pretty interesting. So there's this periodic competition called the Advent of Code, which they essentially propose these programming problems that aren't typically like encountered, and then ask people to solve them, right? And people just have fun with it. And so this guy did the obvious thing and said, let's get a bunch of AIs and run them against these problems and see how well they do. And the reason why this is interesting is because almost by construction, you're dealing with a hackathon scenario where the AI has not seen these problems before. So it kind of falls into this problem statement that you were talking about before, where it's like, okay, we can AIs program what they've seen before and just repeat those same things, but the moment you ask for variations, they struggle. And this article basically confirms that, right? Where modern AIs do a really, really good job of coding basic problems. And so this guy essentially gave these AIs the advent of coding challenges and saw how they did. And so the construction is pretty specific, but I think it's reasonably good. Basically, he gave the AIs exactly what the human gets. So a problem statement, a problem definition, and like the definition of exactly how the solution is meant to be provided. And because these hackathons are fully automated, you get an exact type of input and you must produce an exact type of output, right? So if it's like, hey, you have to, give an answer and it's 10 numbers and each answer has to have exactly one space between it, right? You can't have two spaces, right? You can't start with a space. There has to be exactly what the thing asked for. And I don't think that's a problem because humans are under the same restriction, right? We don't get told that we succeeded in the submission if it didn't give the exact right answer.
So are you saying that this is not like a creative hackathon where it's like come up with a solution for X?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's more like a programming competition.
Right. It's similar to like, your comp sci assignment where you have to do like the number recognition thing in like first year where you have to like turn a bunch of handwritten numbers into like zeros and ones and detect whether it works or not. And then they're going to run it through certain simulation.
Yeah. Or it's like, sort, like you will receive a list of numbers. It will come in the form of a file with one number on each line with no trailing new lines. You must give back that list sorted with two numbers on each line, separated by exactly one space, no trailing new lines.
Okay.
That's a very basic.
So it'd be
problem,
more complex than that, though. Yeah.
Yeah, far more complex. And so the variation here in the experiment is probably the prompt. Like you could possibly get better results if you did better prompt engineering, if you tried reasoning and all these other kinds of things. But the key is that this guy did not intervene. So he just gave them like the problem statement. They had to produce an answer, and that's it, right? Now you can do like rounds of parsing, right? So you get results back from the compiler. You can edit your code, etc. And basically, he did significantly better. So in this table, he's Jayapint. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I'm going to presume that's right. So he got 41 stars, which is basically how well are you doing overall? Did you get the answer?
Is this out of 100?
That's actually a great question. I don't know how many it's out of.
41 out of 100 versus 41 out of 50. It's pretty...
huge difference between those two things. I think it's 50. Yeah, that's right. Because there's 25 problems and each problem has two parts. Okay. Now, the one caveat to the difference in the experimental setup is that the AI got to see both problem statements first, whereas a human only gets one. And then once they get it right, they get to see part two, and then they can attempt part two. This guy's reasoning is that seeing both problem statements up front should make the job easier. I don't actually like that reasoning because you don't know that. Test it, see it, right? Like you should actually experiment with that. There's no particular reason to give them both questions up front. Just give them, again, exactly the same way that a human is given. But basically the upshot is that at the end of the day, so he was able to solve all part ones successfully and could only solve 16 part twos. And the AIs didn't even come close, like not even half of that. Claude was the best. I mean, that's sort of like in line with my own experience is that Claude is by far, if you're programming, by far and away, it is the best. And yeah, it's so, I mean, on problems it hasn't seen, it's like...
What's different about what he set up? Like, what model is he using?
He's doing it himself.
Oh, this is just him as a human.
Yeah, Japan is himself.
Right.
So the point here is that at least the latest and greatest AIs that are available to people right now are not actually very good at programming.
But we haven't tried 01 yet, so we don't know yet, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Like he hasn't tried. No, I think so he hasn't done any of the inference time scaling ones. That's fair. I actually think it's not reasonable to test those yet because like we haven't really started converging on inference time scaling costs and like fair ways to compare that.
Can we have you and Ryan go up against me with 01 and see who wins? Like in one of these things.
Yeah, I mean, there are interesting versions of this problem, right? Which is like, can I beat you if you're working with an AI? And like, are there more industrial versions of this? Like, this is a very academic setup, but like in practice, you're paying me a certain salary, right? So you're like, okay, how much would it cost for Long's time as a coder? How much would it cost for AJ's time as a coder? And give him Claude and give Long nothing, and then like compare the pair, or give Long Claude as well, and just like see like how much does the gap close, like. And as an employer, if you had this set of problems to solve and all you cared about was the time and money that it cost you to solve them, which is generally the case, who's worth employing? You know, the senior dev or the novice? And I would reckon the gap looks much less intense if you did that, if you actually had a meat bag in the loop.
I do think there's still a big issue around when you get stuck. And then you're just like stuck in this loop and you can't actually solve it because you don't know what's going on. But then it'd be very easy for you to come and be like, yes, this one line is wrong. And then you could just get past that block really easily. Whereas like, if I get stuck on something, it's pretty much insurmountable for the most part. Or like, I find it really difficult to get past that, even with O1 or whatever coding model I use.
Yeah. But there's still things that you can do as a human to prompt it that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do without the human. So, for example, you can say, hey, this solution didn't work. We're at a dead end. Try something just totally different. You know, give me a totally different angle on this. Or step back and start explaining to me the things that you're doing so that I can maybe try and have a hope at understanding what went wrong. Anyway, so that was my one thing I wanted to present, was just that advent of code 2024, which happened at the end of the year. And I guess current model performance against it. Trends towards this challenge that you and I have been discussing today of it will solve the basic problems, but struggle with variations if AI doesn't get significantly better than it is today.
So as we think about what humans are going to do in the future, as like technology changes, as AI changes, I've been thinking about what service stations or petrol stations are going to do when the world changes. And I actually think the answer is quite more obvious than I expected, right? Like the business model is a little bit more different to what most people might think. And I wanted to talk about specifically Australia. So if you're Australian, as a kid, maybe even now, you've probably been to a service station, picked up a sausage roll, and like, you know, the servo life is like a thing. I just recently read the book Servo, which is like a biography of a guy who worked in a Melbourne service station for like 6 years in the graveyard shift. And like the entire story is about all the druggers and all the weirdos he met throughout the, like he calls them gumbos, throughout the years. And the story is really fascinating. He talks about all the times he had sex in like the bathroom in the service station with random people that come through. Like it's weird, but also a life I've never lived, and so I was curious to see life through a service station worker. So when I was thinking about that, I was like, okay, like what happens to these places? Like once electric cars become more of a thing, and we stop using petrol as much, or we run out of fossil fuels. And so one of the things I did was I looked at the financial statement. So I don't really read financial statements of companies much, but I decided to take a crack at it. I picked Ampol, also known as Caltex. Caltex and Ampol are the same thing. They're rebranding to Ampol now, like over Caltex. And so when I looked at the 2023 financial statement, do you want to know that, like, do you have a guess on like the revenue breakdown between like fuel versus like convenience retail versus other things?
I wouldn't have a clue.
Okay. So 96% of revenue comes from fuel, right? That's 32 times more in revenue from fuel than from convenience retail, right? And that breakdown's quite broad. So that's including like selling fuel to like airplanes and jets and like things that aren't necessarily just retail fuel consumption.
Okay. Yeah. But makes sense that they do that. I didn't even think about that.
But the interesting thing is like when you actually like break it down to just service stations and you look at profit margins, that changes quite drastically. And so if we look at the profit margin from convenience retail from service stations, it's $350 million a year, right? If we look at the profit margin from fuel for the entire financial year for Ampol, it's zero or close to zero. And so it's so interesting that basically 100% of profit.
Wait. So their profit from the shit they sell in the convenience station, the ice creams, the chewing gum, the whatever, is 300 mil a year.
350,
plus
yeah.
Or minus. That profit.
Yeah.
And it's zero from the fuel. So the fuel is a loss leader.
Yeah, pretty much. So the margins are basically 3 to 5 cents per
it's
liter.
It's like the hamburger, right? Like fast food stations, like fast food places make losses on hamburgers, and where they make all their money is fries and drinks.
Yeah, this is exactly like I literally put like the equivalent of like the dollar change menu at like McDonald's. They're like lead you in with this like loss leader, and they're like, okay, we're gonna make all this money on other stuff instead. And yeah, the margin's only 3 to 5 cents per liter for petrol, which is pretty low, right? Considering, damn, I wanted to pull out the price of petrol off the top of my head, but I haven't really paid attention. It's like $2 or something, $1.80, 90.
I don't know. Man. A gram is $20.
I'm exposing myself as someone that gets his wife to like pump the petrol and he forgets about it. So, anyway, 3 to 5 cents on like whatever amount is still a very low margin. We're talking like single-digit percentage margins. So yeah, I actually think service stations are pretty safe. Like they're just going to replace this loss leader with like, you know, electric charge stations or something like that.
Maybe they're going to get better, right? Because like if you have an electric charging station, you don't spend 15 minutes at a servo, right? Like, but you have to go inside, you have to kill time for 15 minutes, fine, fuck it. Like you like buy a coffee that you wouldn't necessarily buy if you were just in and out.
So they have to merge they have to like increase the experience to something more like a cafe or a restaurant.
I was going to say, yeah, maybe that's where Starbucks wins, right? They become the new server.
Starbucks could 100% take over this market with like charging stations. We should pitch that.
I mean, and that's what's fascinating. I mean, like your information diet's so fascinating to me because like I wonder how many cafe owners, etc., have done that and looked at it and been like, holy shit! Like all of the money is made in supplementaries. Like why? Like, and that's our core business. Why don't? That's a very natural expansion.
Yeah, I should caveat that there might be a few mistakes, like maybe the numbers aren't fully accurate, but like the thesis is still the same. They make most of their money from convenience retail as opposed to
Look, I mean, definitely it's easier as EVs because like surely it's easier to create an EV charging point than it is to like handle the supply chains of fuel. You might like I reckon you're going to see like these weird incentives or like people like purposely hamstringing their charging so that you have to spend that extra 5 minutes in the cafe. They're going to like, you know, kind of like people spend an inordinate amount of intellectual capital on figuring out the exact right delay between logging into an app and seeing the notifications that the app has waiting for you. There's an intentional delay on that to like make sure you get peak dopamine response. It's like when you log into Facebook, when you log into Instagram, and like there's a little pause before it shows you how many notifications you've got. That is a completely intentional design. It has got nothing to do with your network connection. And so, like all these like weird things, and there'll be an optimal curve where like if it takes an hour to charge, you're not going to go to that place. But if it takes 5 minutes to charge, you're not going to spend enough money at the place for it to be worth. You know, like so. There's going to be this. Oh man. Okay, that's way more interesting. Than
so if you're an executive at BP or Ampol and you want to get us as consultants, like not very expensive, like. You know, we'll figure out this stuff for you. We'll like do the product insights.
Dude, I hire AJ as a consultant. I'm gonna read financial statements, man.
Yeah, that's all I got for you. So servers in 2030, optimal stair height and economics in graveyards, and then also how humans compare against AI. Like, I think it was a pretty good spread.
And next week, I'm expecting to hear about optimal hair straightness.
I think that's a very subjective topic. Is there an optimal? Like. We're talking aesthetics.
You're just going to find one objective category where you can say that.
Yeah, like aerodynamics or like comb time to comb, like from like the front of your head to the back.
You can dig in and look into hair straighteners. Right? And how hair straighteners work.
That's actually a great question. I have no idea how hair becomes straight or curly.
I also don't know how they work, but I recently learned they have an aeroplane mode.
Interesting.
Wild.
Okay, so if you've listened to this episode, I want to tease a few other topics I've got in my backlog because that might convince you to come to the next episode. And maybe Loon, if you have any other cool thoughts you want to share, you got hair straightening. So I've got a few. So I've got hot water, So there's a new trend where like they're basically, you know what? If I say it, then it just ruins the entire thing. But basically, it's
I don't think they want like hops and alcohol, but like without the alcohol.
Yeah, it's a new trend. The financials of Burning Man, the $900 billion we lose from returns of e-commerce stuff, and then also sodium ion batteries, which I literally have a headline that I'm like, read about this. I have no idea what sodium ion batteries are, but
I generally love the idea of doing finances on like really bizarre things and just seeing what interesting stuff comes
dude,
up.
it's so cool. Yeah. What have you got?
Mine is high-speed sequential DNA computing. So like essentially we're at a stage now where we can mimic solid-state drives using DNA.
What?
So not just the storage component, like we've known we can store data in DNA for a long time, but like how do you read and write at high speed, and like what are the latencies and what's the throughput and what's the like resilience? We talked about crystal storage a little while ago. DNA, super interesting. The other one that I had was how lightning works, which is actually not really how I thought it worked. And the technology that like humans have built around lightning in terms of how to make sure the planes don't constantly fall out of the sky and how buildings don't constantly catch fire. And like how do you build a society when lightning is a thing and why we can't capture it and how we are trying, right? And some of the challenges in the technology that people are building around, like there's a shit ton of lightning that happens. And in principle, there's enough energy in lightning to power a very large percentage of the shit we need to power. So, you know, what are all the challenges that stop that being a thing that we actually do? So that's one of the ones I was reading.
Dude, you're telling me we could start a lightning capture company? That'd be sick. Is there a lightning capture company, or should we wait till next week?
My most interesting fun fact was that lightning doesn't come from the sky.
What?
It travels up from the ground to the cloud.
What?
Yeah, that's my teaser.
Okay.
There you go.
I feel like I should have known this as like someone who studied like weather patterns for like physics, but
It's not entirely true, but that's the clickbait.
I guess 10 years of like not looking at this, yeah, that still blew my mind. Cool. If you've listened this far, you must be somewhat interested in what Loon and I talk about. So if you are, please subscribe on YouTube. We're trying to get to, I don't know, let's say 500 subscribers by the end of the year. I think that would be pretty cool. So if you could do that for us, that'd be amazing. Because then I will put in more effort to look into financials, and Loon will put a lot more effort into looking into scientific papers. And between the two of us, we'll kind of meet in the middle and, you know, do the intersection between science and business. And sometimes I'll cross into science. Sometimes we'll cross into the financials. You know, we'll figure it out. But it should be fun. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.